Hey everyone, God bless you. Thanks so much for tuning in. I prepared a reflection for you today entitled Same-Sex Marriage After 10 Years. This happens to be 2025, the 10-year anniversary of the Supreme Court decision, the Obergefell decision, which legalized same-sex marriage in the United States after many, many years of controversy over this subject, at least 20 years of societal unrest. And after that period, after this 10 years, many are making reflections and thinking about the impact of same-sex marriage and where the culture is today with regards to marriage. And it just so happens that Patristic Nectar is going to be hosting a fantastic conference on the significance of marriage in society this coming October 10th and 11th. So I hope you'll go to themarriageconference.com and check it out, to be edified and greatly uplifted, I think, on this wonderful subject of marriage. What is the legacy of Obergefell in the United States these last 10 years? Well, I want to remind you of the way that same-sex marriage came to pass in the United States. I'm sure many of you who are watching are Gen Z and younger and probably don't remember a lot of, or were even conversant with cultural matters when these decisions were being made. But you should know just right up front, they have nothing to do with democracy or the will of the people. This radical change in the very definition of marriage and the legality of marriage was made by judges. It was imposed by judges against the will of the people. And I would just say this, that it wasn't just against the southern states or the Midwest or, places in America that were more traditionally Christian or culturally conservative. No. I'm a fourth generation Southern Californian. And this imposition started here. And the imposition of activist judges against the will of the people was something that I lived through. It really came to a head 25 years ago in the year 2000 when we passed a proposition here in the state of California by more than 61%. That's not a small victory. That's a big victory when you're crushing it in the 60s. It was called Proposition 22. And it was simply an initial reaction to those who were messing with marriage. We knew, we Californians, yes, we liberal Californians, we knew that you don't do that marriage is something from God, not politicians. Marriage is pre-political. It's something that God fashioned at the very beginning of creation, at the beginning of the human race. And politicians didn't make it, and politicians shouldn't be messing with it, and Californians knew that. And so by almost 62%, we passed in the year 2000 Proposition 22. And then the activists, the know-it-all judges, started messing with us. And we did again pass Proposition 8 in 2008. I was a priest during both of these times, and engaged very much in supporting marriage and her respect in society and not allowing judges to play God. And 2008 was a very, very big deal. No one thought amongst the kind of liberal leaders of the United States, no one thought that California would again define marriage as between a man and a woman. But what do you know? It's exactly what happened. In 2008, we passed Proposition 8. President Obama ran both times for the presidency by affirming that he would be a defender, that he personally believed in marriage as the union of a man and a woman, and that he would defend this. He did it the first time he ran, and he did it the second time. He knew that he was never going to be elected president by our country unless he had some respect for the institution of marriage. He lied out his teeth the second time, certainly, because he had an evolution. He was illumined just after he was elected the second time and became a proponent of same-sex marriage and an opponent of what he had said he believed in. By the way, you can't do that. If you're going to be a politician, and we need politicians of substance, politicians of integrity who are rooted in the Western tradition and well-educated. We need them. We need these kinds of politicians. And you can't say you're going to run on something and then shortly after getting elected, change. That's called lying. And that should get you recalled. That should get you thrown out. Yes. Shortly after we passed 2008, the courts overturned the will of the people. And there has been a vociferous assault on the state of marriage, the very institution of marriage, since. Now, there are other precedents. The passing of no-fault divorce in California in 1969 was a terrible assault on marriage. Of course, the legalization of abortion also decimated the sanctity of family life and the nature of the sacred union of a man and a woman in marriage. The legalization of adultery, treating it like it was nothing. All of these things contributed, of course, to terrible decisions and much suffering to this moment. But I just want you to know that the reality of same-sex marriage in the United States was an imposition of the courts. The most liberal of all states, twice in the 21st century, refuted it. But the know-it-all judges, they had to have their way. There was, of course, in these decisions, primarily led by Justice Anthony Kennedy, who retired, I think, from the court in 2018. But he was the great champion of the LGBT movement as far as its legal inroads and the overturning of marriage. He's their hero, very much so. And he was a great wordsmither, too, came up with all sorts of new definitions of freedom and liberty that no one has ever heard about before. Kennedy started back in 1996 in a Supreme Court decision, Romer versus Evans. He framed the discussion at that time with regards to homosexuality and the rights of homosexual persons. He tried to turn the legal focus from an evaluation of acts, which is the traditional legal approach to sexual deviancy. He wanted to turn it from an evaluation on behavior and inclinations and actions to a matter of protected class. And so he proposed this concept that homosexuals form a specific class of persons who must have dignity, and there are certain aspects of their life that cannot be imposed upon by law. This was his way. After that decision, our Congress, believe it or not, so not just the people of the state of California and many other states you'll hear about in a second, but our Congress passed the Federal Defense of Marriage Act so that there would be a check on the legal propagation, the manipulation of the definition of marriage and the propagation of legal activism. That's 1996 as well. The next major step forward was the case Lawrence versus Texas in 2003, where two homosexual men called the police on themselves. Texas still had, of course, anti-sodomy laws, and called the police on themselves in order that they could get arrested and then take this up to the Supreme Court, which is exactly what they did. And again, Anthony Kennedy came through. He wrote the majority opinion, overturning the Bowers versus Hardwick case of 1986, enshrining in the Constitution of the United States a so-called right to commit homosexual sodomy. It became literally a right. And thereby, of course, demonizing Christianity, and not just Christianity, traditional Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, all traditional religions know that it's not healthy, that sodomy is not a healthy way of life, and to lift relationships of sodomy and put them on par with heterosexual relations, copulation unto fruitfulness and the bearing of children and marriage, to do that is a great disgrace, and it's going to be wrought with terrible consequences. This is what took place, in fact, in Lawrence versus Texas in 2003. This right to sodomy was affirmed, thereby demonizing, of course, traditional religion, making Christians appear as bigots, by definition, legal bigots, as though we weren't simply humble followers of revelation that Almighty God gave, in fact, very clear revelation that God gave in the Old and the New Testaments in many, many, many places, taught and affirmed by the Lord of love himself, our Lord Jesus Christ, that there are certain sexual acts that are not good for men, that are bad, and as a result, they're forbidden. You can be mad at Jesus, you can say that he was wrong and that this was terrible, but you can't say that he didn't teach this and that he, as a Jewish rabbi, he didn't forbid it. Indeed, he did. We made a major cultural move away from Jesus by saying it was normal and good and equal to heterosexual union, that sodomy was that. That was unheard of and utterly foolish as a culture to go against Jesus and against Moses and all of the great teachers of the human race, for that matter, foolish actions, foolish actions. Scalia, Justice Antonin Scalia, in response to both the 1996 ruling, majority ruling by Anthony Kennedy, and again by the Lawrence versus Texas 2003 decision, said this. He said first that Kennedy was making things up, completely making things up. After the 2003 decision, Scalia responded to Kennedy because Kennedy said, oh, don't worry, we're legalizing sodomy, but this has nothing to do with same-sex marriage. He knew the culture would never accept it. And so he said, no, this has nothing to do. And Scalia said, don't believe him. Just don't believe him. He knew that this was a complete setup for the propagation of same-sex marriage. And sure enough, just 5 months after the Lawrence versus Texas decision in 2003, the Massachusetts Supreme Court cited it in a case supporting same-sex marriage. Scalia said that Kennedy's view in the Romer decision versus Evans in 96, had no foundation in American constitutional law. And he said his decision in the Lawrence versus Texas case in 2003 was, quote, the end of all morals legislation in America, unquote. What a thing to say. Of course, morality is inescapable. If you take a culture and you trace its laws back to their source, you find the God of that culture. Traditionally, America has been able to trace those laws back to God and the Bible. These laws, no, you trace them back to activist judges inventing a new morality, and you find the gods of our culture. Obergefell in 2015 was Anthony Justice Kennedy's triumph of triumph. A decision in ordering the overturning of all state law that forbade same-sex marriage was passed, the Supreme Court decision. Chief Justice Roberts warned everyone that this was an act of judicial supremacy, making up things and trying to guide the culture simply by inventing something that didn't exist. Justice Scalia called it a judicial putsch. It was like an attack on our country. Thomas and Alito clearly stated that it was a threat to religious liberty. They knew by inventing this new morality and imposing it upon the whole country, they were opening up the majority of Americans who are religious people to legal liabilities and persecutions, marginalizing especially religious leaders in America, which is exactly what the promotion of same-sex marriage has done. Tremendous damage followed the decision of Obergefell in 2015. Another major blow to the states and another major blow to democracy. The passage of this case, the Obergefell decision, nullified more than 3/5 of the states who had referendums and had constitutionally defined marriage as between a man and a woman. Over 31 or 32 states, I can't remember the exact number, simply had all of their efforts to defend marriage nullified by this decision of the Supreme Court. It empowered activist judges, and it opened the floodgates to litigious persecution of Christian people who were simply living according to their conscience and didn't want to participate, for instance, in the promotion of sodomy. No, now they were required to. They had to. And in fact, all sorts of lawsuits were brought by same-sex couples and homosexual persons against florists, bakers, web designers, foster care providers, adoption agencies, counselors, and priests. This is the fruit of such a foolish decision as Obergefell. The ultimate tragedy is that a new definition of marriage has led to children no longer being valued enough to have a mother and a father. This major decision trivializes the idea that somehow mothers and fathers are different and that God has arranged family life such that we need a mother and a father. When I think about my own family and the families of my parishioners, I rejoice in the miracle of God's creation, of having a mother and a father who have different gifts, talents, and dispositions, both of which are so basic and essential to the proper loving upbringing of children. As soon as you strike down God's wisdom by saying that it's just as fine for a child to be raised by two mothers or by two fathers, of course, you're also, as soon as you separate yourself from the law of God, can multiply that to 3 fathers or 5 mothers or 1, legitimizing even one by itself. This utter foolishness has led to very poor outcomes for children. These are consequences to this kind of judicial activism and to the sad passage of the Obergefell decision just 10 years ago. Fidelity, which is not a quality that is jealously guarded in the homosexual community. It's just not a typical quality of homosexual love relations, which is also evident by the fact that the community argued for same-sex marriage, but only a tiny minority actually accessed marriage when it was made available, which shows us that really the issue was not that there were so many people who were in same-sex relationships who wanted to marry. It was a matter of legitimacy and honor. They wanted society to redefine its religion and its moral compass, to bow down and say that they were legitimate, and not just legitimate, but honorable, just as honorable as couples, men and women getting married, according to traditional religious norms of God's law. I would like to end this summary by simply pointing out some interesting developments recently. 2016 with the passage of, or 2015 rather, with the passage of the Obergefell decision seemed like the ultimate triumph, like the LGBTQ movement was in its comfortable driving seat, driving over the religious convictions of traditional Americans and untouchable. But that was the same thought that the pro-abortion providers had after they passed Roe versus Wade. But we discovered with the overturning of Roe versus Wade in 2022 and the Dobbs decision that bad legal decisions based on bad law and reasoning can be overturned even if the groups promoting these things consider themselves to be untouchable. In fact, we see now not just many states protecting the lives of unborn children and affirming the pro-life convictions of their constituents, but we see a fracturing of the LGBT movement that appeared so untouchable just a decade ago. Mostly, I think, due to the T. I think the craze has so shocked Americans that it is receiving opposition even from the Ls, especially from the lesbians who can't abide this chaos, this transgender chaos. It's so outlandish, so mental. The settling of a new dogma with regards to gender just doesn't seem to be really sitting well with the American people. Just like the settling of unrestrained abortion has not settled with America. And it may be the case that the settling with so-called same-sex marriage is also not settling with America. Obergefell and the whole concept of legalizing same-sex marriage was sold to the American public as a way to rectify insurance coverage inadequacies and lack of equality in offering insurance policies to people in gay relationships versus people who were married. Also, the issue of hospital visitation rights. The decision of Obergefell didn't open marriage to a larger group. What it did was redefine marriage. It instead morphed marriage into something that Christian people, traditional religious people, simply can't recognize. It was a redefinition of marriage altogether and a disgrace to marriage, and an act of open societal disobedience towards Christ and towards the Christian faith. Marriage itself, as a result of many bad decisions, but also of the Obergefell decision, is in crisis in the West. The rise of IVF, surrogacy, genetic designer children, polyamory, the birth dearth. Marriage is in crisis. The Supreme Court malpractice that they exercised in Roe v. Wade and that the culture now has recognized and labored to overturn is the same Supreme Court malpractice in Obergefell, taking that which cannot be redefined by any earthly judges and straining too far to redefine an institution that is pre-political and belongs to God himself. And this malpractice of our Supreme Court should be rectified. Justice Thomas, in his opinion of the recent 2022 Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, openly called for the Obergefell ruling to be reconsidered by the court, and I hope it will be. Let's pray that Obergefell will go the way of Roe v. Wade, and that not just unborn children will have their right to live to be asserted again in our country, but that children themselves will have their right to be raised by a mother and a father in a culture that respects marriage will be reaffirmed. This is my hope, that everybody might benefit from it. May it be. God be with you.